Hello, everyone. I am Abdullah Al-Ouda, the Saudi Director of the Freedom Initiative. Thank you for joining us today on an anniversary that we all wish we didn't have to mark. 5 years ago today, at 1:14 p.m., our friend and colleague, Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul to get paperwork he needed to marry his fiancée, Hatice Cengiz. Jamal never came out. In the days and weeks that followed, we would learn the gruesome details of what happened. Jamal was brutally murdered and dismembered inside the consulate with the direct approval and orders from Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. After 5 years, we still have not seen true accountability for Jamal's murder. Instead, we have seen the rehabilitation of Mohammed bin Salman. We have seen human rights deteriorate inside Saudi Arabia. And we have seen Saudi Arabia continue to target dissidents outside its own borders and threaten global security. Today, we are here to honor Jamal's work and legacy and discuss where we are today, 5 years after the murder and the fight for human rights in Saudi Arabia. We will begin today with opening remarks from members of Congress. Then we will hear from Hatice Cengiz, Jamal Khashoggi's fiancée, before beginning our discussion. For the discussion, we are honored to be joined by Jamal's editor at the Washington Post, Karen Atiyah, Jamal's friend, activist Omar Abdelaziz, and Saudi human rights activist Lina Al-Hudlul. Akbar Shahid Ahmed, Huffington Post senior foreign affairs reporter, will moderate the discussion. Now we will turn to hear from members of Congress. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Senator Tim Kaine. We are commemorating a somber anniversary, the awful murder of Virginia resident Jamal Khashoggi by the Saudi government 5 years ago, which demonstrated a level of brutality and dishonesty that cannot be forgotten or tolerated. But there is much more to Jamal's story and to his legacy than the horrific act of state-sponsored violence that ended his life. There's a saying about good journalism that it should comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Jamal's work exemplified this ideal. His commitment to this craft was visible in every sentence that he wrote. Jamal's legacy is not just about his death. His legacy is that we come together every year to honor his memory and remember the crucial role journalists play around the world in defending democracy, documenting abuses, and exposing corruption. Journalists like Jamal Khashoggi are vital to holding those responsible accountable for violating basic freedoms. Like Jamal, we must all remain committed to shining a light on the truth, even when the truth is ugly or difficult. In Jamal Khashoggi's case, the truth was dangerous. Authoritarian governments like that in Saudi Arabia and many others around the world seek to muzzle the press to prevent facts and truth from reaching their own people. Autocrats are afraid of the truth. And at a time when democracy is facing grave threats across the world, our support for brave journalists risking everything to advance truth, transparency, and accountability has never been more critical. So I'm honored to join with everyone today who mourns the loss of Jamal Khashoggi, and in that mourning, we in turn honor his work and his fervent belief in the role of a free press. So together, let us take Jamal Khashoggi's memory and recommit ourselves to standing up to autocrats, to afflicting the comfortable, and to ensuring that courageous reporters everywhere know that we are walking alongside them in their struggle for the truth.
Hi, I'm Chris Van Hollen, and I'm proud to represent Maryland in the United States Senate. And I want to begin by thanking all of you, everyone at POMED, the Project on Middle East Democracy, for your important work over the years to promote democracy and human rights in the Middle East and North Africa. Today, we gather on the solemn 5-year anniversary of the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Jamal was an extraordinary journalist. He was a friend to many. He was the father to 4 beautiful children. He remains beloved and is deeply missed. 5 years ago, doing what he did so well, pursuing the truth and speaking it to power, he was murdered and his body mutilated. His only crime was doing his job, reporting the facts, telling the truth. Saudi Arabia's ongoing record of human rights abuses and wrongful detentions of American citizens and Saudi democracy activists is unacceptable. We must continue to fight for their rights and for their freedom. Jamal Khashoggi would also want us to fight for the freedom of all detained journalists and justice for all journalists killed in the line of duty. We have our work cut out for us because even after the international outcry in response to Jamal's death, press freedom worldwide remains under severe threat. The 2023 World Press Freedom Index, compiled each year by Reporters Without Borders to evaluate the status of freedom of the press around the world, reported that only 30% of countries had good or satisfactory environments for journalists to do their work freely. The other 70% were ranked as problematic, difficult, and very serious for reporters. And in the same report, we've learned that a record number of 540 journalists are detained as of today. 21 have been killed since the start of this year. Authoritarian regimes like China, Russia, and Iran continue to lock up journalists for speaking the truth, including, in some cases, American citizens. Earlier this year, I met with the parents of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who has been wrongfully detained in a Russian prison. It's also been almost 11 years since journalist Austin Tice was abducted in Syria, and I continue to work with his mother, Deborah, to do everything we can to get him back to his family, safe and sound. We have also witnessed continuing crackdowns on freedom of the press in Turkey, Egypt, and other countries that are allies or partners of the United States. And we must do more to speak out in support of freedom of the press in those countries. I will also continue to seek accountability in the death of American citizen and journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was shot and killed while reporting from the West Bank. In May, I was glad to join many of my Senate colleagues in introducing a bipartisan resolution to commemorate World Press Freedom Day, to warn about the increasing threats to freedom of expression around the world, and to advance our shared mission to protect journalists who put their lives on the line to combat misinformation, disinformation, and other efforts to hide the truth. But saying that we support press freedom is an empty gesture unless we take meaningful steps to back it up. It's not enough to just talk the talk. We must walk the walk. We must hold to account those who suppress free speech. It's in that spirit that I'd like to thank Mohammed for ensuring that as we remember Jamal Khashoggi, we resolve to take meaningful action to protect democracy advocates and truth tellers in the Middle East and indeed around the world.
Hello, I'm Representative Gregory Meeks, and I'm the ranking member of the United States House Foreign Affairs Committee. Today marks 5 years since the agents of the Saudi Arabian government brutally murdered Washington Post columnist and United States resident Jamal Khashoggi. The anniversary serves as a stark reminder of Jamal Khashoggi's tireless activism and courageous reporting, both in Saudi Arabia and internationally, and of Saudi Arabia's violent history of repression and intimidation of its dissidents. It is critical the United States does not allow the Saudi government, or any government for that matter, to commit such heinous acts with impunity. Though it's been 5 years since his murder, Khashoggi's legacy lives on as a symbol of the courageous journalists who risk their lives every day to hold governments accountable and report on ongoing abuses and treatment of dissidents, even in the face of personal danger. His memory reinforces our duty to protect those who risk their lives, to shine a light on the darkest corners of injustice. The foreign policy of the United States is hinged on the idea that respect for human rights and the rule of law are sacrosanct. Saudi Arabia's murder of Jamal Khashoggi was an attack on those fundamental pillars of a free society and a wanton disregard for international law. As ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and previously as the chairman of the committee, I condemned and stood up publicly for accountability following Jamal's murder. I led legislative action with House Democrats for years, including by championing the Saudi Dissidents Protection Act with Representative Jerry Connolly and over a dozen other members of Congress. And I continue to press for accountability. This, along with our collective efforts, aim to ensure that the Saudi government's repression of dissidents, both within its borders and beyond, does not go unchecked, and the United States foreign policy pursues both our national security interests while remaining true to our values. As we remember and mourn Mr. Khashoggi, let us all reaffirm our dedication to safeguarding freedom of the press and human rights worldwide, and continue our pursuit of justice for Jamal Khashoggi and his family.
Hey everybody, it's Chris Murphy, United States Senator from Connecticut, member of the Foreign Relations Committee. Thanks to Mohammed for bringing this event together. I cannot believe that it's been 5 years since the brutal murder and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi. I wish I knew him, but I know lots of people that I work with on a regular basis that did know him, that considered him a close friend. And every single day we are mourning for Jamal. But what we know is that his murder was the rule, not the exception, when it comes to the way in which Saudi Arabia has brutally repressed free speech in Saudi Arabia, but also around the world. And our failure, quite frankly, to hold Saudi Arabia to account, not just for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, but for its continued imprisonment, persecution, and murder of the regime's political opponents, has enormous costs to the reputation, the credibility, and the security of the United States. Yes, we are in a fight with China for global preeminence. It will be the defining contest of the next 50 years. But we beat China by standing up for our values and highlighting for the world the difference between our values and the values of autocrats and dictators. And so we have to be able to grow a coalition to fight back against Chinese aggression, at the same time standing up for values of human rights and democracy. It's why I've continued to press the Biden administration to make sure that Saudi Arabia pays a price for its conduct. Saudi Arabia continues to lock up, torture, and murder its political opponents. But it's also why this fight can't stop with Saudi Arabia. Egypt today has tens of thousands of political prisoners, frankly, far more than Saudi Arabia has, far more than Russia has. And yet, business as usual is conducted with that government that continues to use the same over-the-top repressive tactics to crush dissent. This is really important. If we want to be a nation that preaches freedom and equality and human rights around the world, then we have to back up our talk with action. And so thank you to POMED and the Friends of POMED for continuing to raise this challenge to U.S. lawmakers. I'm grateful for our partnership, and I really look forward to continuing our work together.
Hello, I'm Congressman Jim McGovern, co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission in the House of Representatives. I'm honored to join my host, the Freedom Initiative, Project on Middle East Democracy, ALKIS for Human Rights, Committee to Protect Journalists, Democracy for the Arab World Now, Freedom House, Human Rights Watch, and PEN America in commemorating the life and legacy of Jamal Khashoggi. Let me begin by saying that Jamal should still be with us. Nothing, absolutely nothing, can ever justify the decision by the Saudi state to assassinate him. No sea will wash the blood clean from Saudi rulers' hands. I have no doubt that the grief that Jamal's family and friends feel is as great today as it was 5 years ago. Add to that the justified anger at the complete and total impunity that surrounds this case. There is still no information about the whereabouts of Jamal's remains, and those responsible have escaped justice. Yet those who love Jamal have not been brought down by the cruel circumstances of his death. Instead, they have carried on with the causes he fought for: freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and protection of dissenting voices. I wish we could point to progress on these causes in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East in the last 5 years, but I don't see much to celebrate. Just this week, Saudi Arabia's Special Criminal Court sentenced an 18-year-old girl to 18 years behind bars and a travel ban because she expressed support for prisoners of conscience on social media. A few weeks back, the same court sentenced a retired teacher to death based solely on his Twitter and YouTube activity. Since Jamal's death, the Saudi state has escalated its attacks on freedom of expression and peaceful political dissent. The Crown Prince could not tolerate criticism 5 years ago, and he cannot tolerate it now. And it's the Saudi people who suffer the consequences. So what do? Exactly what Jamal did. Keep fighting back. Keep defending the right to think, to write, to speak, to dissent. Keep challenging autocracy and keep defending human rights in the Middle East and here at home. It's the least we can do to honor the memory of Jamal Khashoggi and to build on his incredible legacy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now for Hatice Cengiz, the fiancée of Jamal Khashoggi. Let's hear.
Hello everyone. Thanks for being here today for remembering Jamal's legacy. 5 years ago, I went to Saudi consulate in Istanbul with the love of my life, with dreams and plans for our future together. When I said goodbye to Jamal, before he walked into the consulate, I never imagined what would happen. My life with Jamal was supposed to be beginning, but instead it horrifically and traumatically ended that day. When Jamal was murdered, the world was shocked and horrified that such a horrendous crime could happen. But today, 5 years later, there has been no justice and no closure. What has happened since then? MBS has been welcomed back on the world stage. We all remember President Biden's fist bump and his betrayal of his promise to make Saudi Arabia a pariah. We warned him that it would embolden MBS, and it did. The crackdown in Saudi Arabia has only gotten worse. Jamal left his home with a dream, not just for himself, but for a more democratic Middle East. We remember him today because he wanted everyone, no matter their background, to work together for our future. Jamal believed that our strength isn't in being loud, but in how much we truly stand by our words and work hard for what we believe in. History will remember everyone who pretended to care about human rights but turned a blind eye to MBS crimes. But history will also remember Jamal as a principled journalist, an honorable man who cared about his country and worked for a better future. I was proud to be his woman and stand next to a man that stood up for freedom, democracy, and human rights despite the risk. They may have killed Jamal, but they could not kill what he stood for. Today, we will keep fighting for what he believed in, for freedom, democracy, and human rights. Despite everything, I still believe in justice. Justice always prevails.
Thank you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Akbar and our panelists. Akbar.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and to the speakers who gave those powerful remarks. What we heard from that collection of hugely influential lawmakers, and of course from Hatice Cengiz, is how much this moment, this episode, this brutal murder tells us a lot about the world we're still in, the world we were in 2018 and the world we are in today in 2023. The murder of Jamal Khashoggi and the question of justice for him is not about an individual. It's really about questions like what it means for countries beyond the West to be rising in global heft and significance and what they do with that power. It's a question about US entanglement with countries that often defy its stated values. And it's a question about responsibility for human rights, for protecting civil society at a time when, as we heard, media freedom, nonprofit groups, people who dare to stand up for their communities are at risk worldwide. So as we deal with Jamal Khashoggi's legacy, I invite us to think about it as a forward-looking thing. And I'm excited to talk to some of the most important voices from Saudi civil society, some of the people closest to Jamal himself, about what lessons we can take from his fight. I'd like to open with you, Omar, thinking about the question of accountability specifically for Jamal, right? So we've heard from the Saudi state that from their point of view, this case is closed. They say the Crown Prince has said this was a mistake. It wasn't supposed to happen. They put some people up for trial, issued some sentences, and they want us to think that this is over and done with. Omar, can you help us understand why for Jamal's community, that's insufficient, and what kind of steps towards justice to actually holding his killers accountable you and other people would like to see? Omar, you're muted, if you could unmute. Thank you.
Thank you, Akbar. Thank you, everybody. I cannot believe it's been 5 years since that day. I cannot believe it's been 5 years when everything in my life and the lives of so many people have changed. Actually, what happened to Jamal Khashoggi that day, it wasn't the beginning of injustice in Saudi Arabia, and it's not the end. And Jamal himself believed that so many things could be changed in Saudi Arabia, and he was peacefully trying to change with his words. This is the only weapon that Jamal carried in his life. Few weeks ago, there was a viral video of the infamous killer, Saud al-Qahtani. He was smiling, shaking hands with other people, and taking pictures like nothing has changed. He was simply sending a message to the Saudi people. He was sending another message to the whole world that yes, we did that. We're not worried, and we're gonna keep doing what we're doing, because every single day since the death of Jamal Khashoggi, and even before, we're hearing so many stories about people being tortured, about people being raped and killed and assassinated around the world by the Saudi government.
Thank you. And to build on that, Lena, I wanted to go to you and understand a bit about the civic space within Saudi Arabia in these 5 years and in the broader Arab world. This was a monumental moment, right? Has everything shrunk? Was there a sense of a resurgence and a pushback, and now it's gone back?
Thank you very much, Akbar. And thank you, Amar. If I may, can I just build on what Amar just said? I think just regarding accountability, I think it's important to note that the Saudi government said that the case is closed without revealing any of the names of the people who have been sentenced. But at the very same time, when they arrest activists, they have a defamation campaign against them, and they publish their names. So, I mean, it's just very clear that it's just a whitewashing process, and that no accountability has been made. Regarding the general situation of human rights in Saudi Arabia, I think it's important to go back to how things started. So basically, how MBS managed to be so brutal and to have all this power is that when he ascended to power in 2017, he established what we now call the state security. And basically, it's his private police, and it basically restructured all the security apparatus that was pre-existent in Saudi. So all the security institutions are led by him, and they work in a way that is how a police state works, without warrants, without having to have a judicial. Without the judiciary, having to give orders and so on. So we have really entered an era of being a total police state in Saudi Arabia, where the state security can break into houses at night, take people, forcibly disappear them, put them on trials at the terrorism court, which is also under the state security, have trials behind closed doors without anyone being able to know what happens behind these trials, and sentence them to decades in prison, or the death penalty. I'll just maybe focus on quick examples. I think the main issues that MBS managed to gain international credibility and legitimacy is by giving this narrative of reforming women's rights in Saudi Arabia. But I'll just maybe quickly give the current situation of women's rights in Saudi. So basically, what we know is that, of course, things have changed. But first, they're not institutional. They have not been. They have not been done with civil society, and they're not consistent. The second thing is that the male guardianship system is still in place, meaning that women are still subject to the will of their male guardian, their father, their husband, and sometimes their son. And it all depends on from which family a woman comes from, to be able to enjoy the new freedoms, such as being able to travel without the prior consent of a male guardian, and so on. So the thing is, okay, we are still in a system where women are still subject to a male, and that everything a male sees as disobedience can lead a woman to jail. So if we talk about, women freedom, the first thing to do is to remove the disobedience law, to remove care homes that are basically prisons for women who are disobedient. And, if MBS truly wanted to reform, to give women freedom, he would, remove the very basics of the male guardianship system that forbid women from enjoying these freedoms. The second thing is, even the so-called freedoms that have been granted, they're not consistent, and it's really arbitrary. What we see is that women still get arrested today for example, not wearing a abaya. And the most recent case we have is Manahel Al-Ataibi, who's the sister of a famous influencer, who is now being tried at the terrorism court for not wearing a abaya, when at the very same time the Saudi government has been bragging about reforming women's rights to the West. And the narrative and the discourse that is given to Saudi people is completely different. So, you always have two Saudi Arabias, one for the West to see and to applaud, and one of repression inside the country. And a third thing when it comes to women's rights is about women rights defenders themselves. So you can't say that you're reforming a country when the women who have been leading the fight are jailed, tortured, and that's the case of my sister. I'll just maybe give brief details. I think everyone knows the case of my sister Lujain, who, by the way, Jamal had written about and said that Lujain should be applauded instead of being imprisoned. And so my sister, Lujain, was one of the leaders of the Women to Drive campaign. She was arrested, forcibly disappeared, tortured by the same man who Omar just mentioned, Saud al-Qahtani. And then she was sentenced as a terrorist. So again, it also gives a very telling image of what is happening in the country. And so other than, women's rights who have been fighting, before social media, you also have now everyone getting arrested for whatever they write on social media, and everything is considered a red line. You can't speak about any subject without being considered as destabilizing the unity of the nation. So talking about unemployment can get you to jail. Talking about women's rights can get you to jail. Talking about social issues, talking about salaries, anything that is not applauding the government leads you to either getting arrested and having to sign to close your account, or being sentenced. And recent sentences we've seen for tweets go to 27 years for Salman Shihab, who was only tweeting on my sister and standing in solidarity with women's rights activists. And as was mentioned, Manal, who's been sentenced to 18 years for tweets. You also have 50 years for tweets of the people of the Huwaitat tribe who were displaced for the Neon project. And just recently, a death sentence for tweets. So there is no civic space at all. And more than this, it's not only about people complaining themselves, it's also collective punishments. So they managed to really create an atmosphere of complete fear and muzzling everyone by also targeting the families. So for example, personally, my sister was arrested and sentenced, but my whole family is on a travel ban in Saudi Arabia. And I'm not the only one. I think Abdullah here also, Omar as well. So it's really not an exception to have your family and everyone related to you put on a travel ban, so that they make sure that no word goes out of the country. And they've managed. It's been so difficult for us to get information from inside, as trials are held behind closed doors. There are no warrants for arrests. So it's basically complete chaos. It's not a country, it's a police state. And also, I'll just mention the Human Rights Commission. I think it's important to note, they've also created this Human Rights Commission that's traveling the world bragging about human rights improvements and so on. But at the end of the day, it's really just another arm for repression and for covering up the violations. And we will be publishing a report soon with much more details, with examples and so on. So the only real civic organizations are the ones here mentioned, and some others, of course, but all abroad, none in the country. Maybe just talking, as I talked about the death sentence, also it's a very sad issue these days that the Saudi government has promised to stop executing minors, but they still do. There's an unprecedented increase in death sentences in Saudi Arabia for lies, protests when they were minors, tweets. So really, Saudi people are getting their heads cut because they tweet, because they express themselves, and we want to call that a country that's reforming. Maybe just to end this, I think that it's important to really listen to the civic voices abroad. We're taking so much risk that it's very easy for the Saudi government to promise on paper or with international media and the organizations that they will reform, but at the end of the day, it's, as was said, it's walking the walk, and they haven't yet. And accountability is yet to be made for Jamal, and freedom is yet to be gained for the Saudi people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. And as you described, there's such a range of violations, right? From violations against freedom of expression to just pure brutality. It really makes me think about one of Jamal's, to me, most striking pieces, where he said, quote, "Saudi Arabia has not always been as it is now. We Saudis deserve better." Which I think was such an important aspect of his work, is to say, we are full human beings. Acknowledge us, respect us in that way. And as you're describing your sister, yourself, so many incredible voices out of Saudi that could be contributing to the country's progress are instead shunned, silenced, pushed out, and really tormented. Karen, I wanted to go to you as Jamal's editor, someone who worked on so many of his most powerful pieces. You published yourself a really powerful piece today reflecting on this grim anniversary and talking about going to a time event, the year of Jamal's murder. And something you said that really stood out to me, where you're at this ritzy gala, you know, everyone's saying, wow, we're commemorating these human rights defenders and global leaders. And you see this cover that they put up of Jamal, and within minutes, there's another cover of MBS, right? And you say, quote, a murder victim and his alleged killer was shown on the same level, in the same way, both of them party props. I wanted to ask you to expand on that point, on what you describe as a both sidesism, and how that's, in these 5 years since Jamal's murder, how that's spread in the media.
Thanks so much, Akbar. Again, Lina, Abdullah, Omar, it's such an honor and a privilege, a sad privilege to be on this panel with all of you today. Before I talk about the time event, one thing about working with Jamal, even just the first time I met him, almost 6 years ago now, I think the both of us, like, he came with this vision, and I had just started as this newly formed global opinion section at the Washington Post. And I think when it came to Saudi Arabia, my interest in Jamal, and Jamal's interests even, were to give space to outside of the common kind of tropes of Saudi Arabia either. There's a lot of coverage and talk about, you know, the royals, palace intrigue, a lot of talk, you know, about, yes, of course, about the abuses and how terrible, you know, Saudi Arabia was for women's rights, for all sorts of progressive issues. But surely that's not the whole picture. We knew that there are human beings, that there's a culture, that there's music, that there's history, that there's joy even, that there's creativity and intellect. And so the opportunity to work with Jamal, who at least to me at the time was oh, wow, a Saudi voice that's outside of the usual, was an exciting opportunity. And it was a chance through him in a lot of ways, and through his writing and through his experience, for me, and by extension, I hope the readers, to learn other sides of Saudi Arabia. And informally, that Jamal, in a way, introduced me, Lina, to your family through the case of Lujain, and to you, Abdullah, through the case of your father, who was imprisoned unjustly, Salman al-Uda, who's imprisoned unjustly, and that they were the true reformers. They were the ones who had been fighting for a more progressive vision of Saudi Arabia. So for MBS to come in and to silence those voices and to claim sort of all the credit for reforming an entire country, this millennial himself, that he was the ones who have done it, was just not true. So through Jamal and through his work and through, again, what I was learning and through the names that I've heard of, he also shared, he was generous in wanting to share his platform. So it wasn't just about his work. It was also about, hey, here's these names, you should reach out to this person. Did you know about the history of movies and cinema in Saudi Arabia? Things like that, that just paint a more human picture and where reform really comes from. And reform comes from the people, right? So to fast forward to 5 years later, after his murder, to that kind of memory I had going to a time party, and again being situated in the role of the US media in creating very sort of flat depictions in some ways of Saudi Arabia, right? And so there was Jamal, and Jamal at that point, through his horrible murder, has been elevated to the symbol of freedom and democracy and justice, and he's the good guy, and he's one of us, and he's a journalist. And then we have his killer, who this sort of, maybe he's an oppressor, maybe he's a reformer, we're not sure, even though we have plenty, as journalists, we have plenty of evidence. We have plenty, more than enough evidence that point to that MBS with his power, with his money and his wealth is not afraid to crush anyone who gets in the way. So to me, there was never any question or doubt or equivalence to be had with something like that. So to literally see these two kind of symbols put up as both of them in some ways dehumanize objects while people are bumping to Michael Jackson and sort of drinking and celebrating themselves rather than really deeply contemplating what sort of world we live in. Again, joy and pain exist in this world. But I think for me as a member of the media and still in the US media, I have been extremely disappointed and aghast in many ways of how the media, mainstream media, has really continued to play this game. I see it as a game, and I see it as a shallow game, as if, again, a murdered person and their murder deserve the same level of deserved balance, right? And I think what has been lost, sadly, I think Jamal and I, on our little project, what we were hoping to do at the Post, which was to elevate much more Arab voices. And again, not just about what it means to be Saudi, about the histories. We had an opportunity to really fight back against the erasure of Saudis. And I think to me, that has, of course, us talking here, you know, that has not happened, but to an extent, there's less space for, I would say, sadly, I think for, in general, I think people who want to, you know, proudly talk about human rights, I think we've seen a shift even in our domestic media away from quote unquote woke topics, right? That to even mention progressivism, to even mention that people deserve to live in dignity and with human rights, and that they don't deserve to be crushed by oppressive system all of a sudden is virtue signaling, and which is sadly what some of my colleagues in the media have said about those of us who continue to point out the hypocrisies and continue to point out the injustices. It's been disheartening to see that, but perhaps, you know, not altogether unsurprising. So I think it's always a bittersweet thing to think about this, because it is incredible that 5 years later that members of Congress, that us here today, are still talking about Jamal. They could have gotten away with it. Khadija, her bravery, the fact that she was even outside that consulate, all these years we've refused to let them forget and erase Jamal's name, and by extension, what Jamal has come to stand for, which is the opening of that space to challenge MBS's narrative, the opening of the space to even talk about the abuses in Egypt, the opening of the space to criticize America itself and what who America has gone to bed with in order to preserve its own power, and frankly, the institutions within America that have long profited and continue to profit from Saudi blood money, right? So Jamal's murder did create and has kept open that space to discuss all of these things, and for me also to critique my own industry and our complicity in some of these abuses in in the name of, again, both sidesism, in the name of quote unquote professionalism. We have learned to ignore the humanity of the people who are crushed by power, and that is not our job. I think Jamal was a prime example of that, and that's something I carry with me every day. It's our job is to, as it was said before, to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And yeah, I mean, I still to this day, as much as I can, and the people that I work with, to try what we can do to still uplift those voices. Abdullah, I mean, your father, Mina, what your family has done for your sister, and Omar. Like, I think the best thing to do to follow in Jamal's example is to pass the mic, so to speak. And because at the end of the day, it's about Saudis. It's your country. It's not MBS's country. It's yours. It belongs to the people. So I think that's our job, to keep reminding everybody of that.
Thank you so much, Karen. And I really appreciate what you said about this idea of this pushback to even talking about human rights or talking about values, and this idea that that is some like amazing, sophisticated arch discovery about the world, that this is just the way things are. And in fact, that's actually the laziest possible position anyone can take. I wanted to come back to you, Omar, with a question about one of the ongoing issues of transnational repression, which the Biden administration has also promised to talk about a lot more. And you, like Jamal, were being pursued beyond Saudi borders by Saudi agents inside Canada in your case. We've seen obviously this case now in Canada this summer of a Sikh activist being killed. Other governments are getting into this game, right? It's not just Saudi Arabia. And I'm curious for you, 5 years on from what Jamal went through, from your own experience, are we doing enough to really tackle with the threat of this cross-border repression? If you could unmute, Omar. Thank you.
I mean, let's be real here. MBS believes that if he's normalizing relations with Israel, he's going to get a free pass card. So he's going to do whatever he wants. He's going to, no one is going actually to talk about what he did or what he's going to do. What happened in 2 October 2018, few weeks before that, my brothers and a large group of my friends were arrested. And I'm not the only one. So many activists around the world from Saudi Arabia, they've experienced the same thing. And it never stopped, never ends. Nobody's going to stop the Saudi government, because they do believe that the international community is focusing on something a way more important than a bunch of individuals in the United States or in Canada or in Europe. I'm really sorry about that, but I mean, this is the reality that we live in. But here's the thing: I'm not blaming Biden's administration. I'm not blaming the word. I don't like using the victim card here, because I do believe that we're strong enough to keep fighting and to keep telling the world that this fight is our fight. And whether we're going to die, whether we're going to be jailed or we're going to be arrested, there are so many brave from our country, so many brave people. They're going to keep doing what Jamal Khashoggi and other people are doing. Yes, I'm really sorry for thousands of people who are stuck in jails in Saudi Arabia. And I'm worried also about the security and the safety of so many dissidents around the world, especially in the United States, Canada, and the UK. Because only a few weeks ago, there was an activist from India, or the Sikh leader, who was assassinated. But these governments are sending us a message that you're not safe. They want to scare us. They want us to be silent. But this is not going to happen. Yesterday, I had a very long conversation with so many activists from Saudi Arabia, and I told them, and I do believe that this is the feeling that I get from most of them, that we're gonna keep fighting, and this is not the end. It's just the beginning.
Thank you so much, Omar. On that note, Lena, I wanted to come to you on something you've been talking about a lot in recent months, which is the sports washing campaign, right? And how the Saudis have been using soccer, golf, different ways to change their image. And I'm wondering for you as an advocate for the Saudi diaspora community, how do you reach people who maybe are looking at Saudi through an entertainment lens, right, and are not looking at it through a human rights lens or a women's rights lens, and maybe all they know is, well, women can drive there now, right? And like there are concerts, so it's okay. How do you tackle that? And what do you make of the Saudi government narrative?
By the way, a few minutes ago, my favorite team, Al Ittihad from Saudi Arabia, they were they had to play. They had the match with the Iranian team. So, but then suddenly they refused to play that match because they saw an image, I think, of Qasem Soleimani. And they said, no, this man, he killed so many Saudis and he involved in attacking our country. So we're not going to play. Great. But you guys are still protecting so many killers in your own country. So the Qahtani is hanging around and taking pictures and smiling with other people. Sport is a very good thing. I'm a big fan of Al Ittihad. I don't know, maybe Lena and Abdullah, maybe I think Lena is, she's a big fan of Hilal. But anyways, this is not the problem. Spending money on soccer or football because you want to improve this, the Saudi league, it's a very good thing. But what they're trying to do simply is whitewashing their crime. They want to tell the world that we've changed. Now we're bringing Cristiano Ronaldo, we're bringing Karim Benzema to tell the whole world that Saudi Arabia has changed. In the same time, they're arresting so many people and they're jailing so many people. And we just heard, like, I don't know, what was the longest sentence? It's about 40 to 50 years. They just sentenced a lady, she's 18 or 20 years old, to 40 years. So, and again, another question, what are we going to get out of this? What the Saudi people are going to get out of this? Even economically, what are we going to get out of this? What is the benefit of having Cristiano Ronaldo or Karim Benzema or all these famous players, great stars? I'm happy to have Karim Benzema in my team. You know, I wouldn't lie. It's something great. But at the end of the day, I'm asking myself a question. We got nothing. MBS is very good at whitewashing his image. He's very good, and his team now, they're trying to learn new techniques in PR to promote a better image of what we call the new Saudi, the new era of 2030. But again, people like Lina Al-Hadloul and Abdullah Lauda and Karen Atiyah, they're not giving them a good time. Keep fighting, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aman. And thank you, Akbar. I'll just before answering this question, if I may, I think I just have to thank Karen so much for what she just said about elevating Saudi voices. I think that's one of the main. I mean, that's what really remains for me about Jamal, is really that trying to truly elevate Saudi voices. Because now what I see, and I think Abdullah also always mentions that, is that we Saudis, we have always had our words put in our mouth. So you have journalists talking about how happy the youth is about MBS, that, you know, the youth have been asking for this for these changes for years, and that they're so happy. But no one has asked Saudis, and if they do ask Saudis, they can't tell their opinion, because if they're not happy, then they'll get imprisoned. And it's exactly like just before MBS. Amar, معلش, can you mute yourself? I think I can hear you. No? Okay, it's weird. Okay, so sorry. Okay, just before MBS, talking about democracy. No, Saudi people are not ready for democracy because they're too religious or whatever, you know, the reason is given. But, you know, extremism comes from the government itself. So, you know, the government talks about Saudi people and puts the words in our mouth, and, you know, people, the international community repeats it without really knowing who Saudis are. I mean, I'm not Omar, I'm not Abdullah, I'm different. We're all different, and we've never really wanted to know what a Saudi society is. We've always wanted to make it very homogeneous, that where no one is different, that we're all the same, and that either we're all so happy about MBS or that we're all extremists. And it's just nonsense. So yeah, just thank you, Karen, for really trying to genuinely trying to elevate Saudi voices and giving us a voice. And as Amar said, it is our fight, but also when words are taken from us, then it's very difficult to make it ours if people talk on our behalf. Talking about sports now, I mean, my opinion is that I always say, I can't say what the intention of the Saudi government is when they do that. I can talk about the consequences. And what we've seen is that since they started investing in sports, human rights violations have not been mentioned as much as before. If we Google Saudi Arabia, the first things that would come up is, Benzema coming to Saudi Arabia, Neymar, and so on. So it's about the fact that the consequence is whitewashing. I don't know if the government wanted that initially, but this is what happens. And the idea is about Saudi Arabia, of course, whitewashing, it's about image, but also in the long term about influence. So now Saudi Arabia managed to open doors in this sector. So after the murder of Khashoggi, they were a pariah, they were toxic, and so on. Now, because you have all these stars, and it's entertainment, it's it's sexy, it's open, everyone likes it, they will be able to open other doors. And that's where the issue also lies, is that Saudi Arabia will be seen as an open country trying to genuinely reform and so on, and opening doors to invest in other sectors, and not only opening doors in other sectors, gaining influence. I mean, how do we have accountability these days? Accountability comes also with financial sanctions. So saying, okay, Saud al-Qahtani is not allowed to own houses in this country. Mohammed bin Salman is not allowed to buy this company because he has murdered a journalist. But if now today they buy everything in different sectors, then they gain influence, they gain control, and there are less and less avenues for accountability. And this is where the problem lies. And then it also is linked to the question you asked about, how do we try to convince people that this issue is not only about, the poor Saudis in their countries, and that it's so far away, they don't know who we are. It's also about them. It's also about them. It's not only about us in the country that are repressed. Mohammed bin Salman, if he could, tomorrow he would repress UK citizens as well, but he doesn't have this power. So it's about saying that the values and the way the Saudi government deals and rules the country, they want to extend. So one day, the example I always give is Mohammed bin Salman arrested the prime minister of a sovereign country, Lebanon, because he has leverage on Lebanon. So if tomorrow Mohammed bin Salman manages to buy everything, to have so much influence, let's say in the UK, what will stop him from arresting a UK minister? This is what I'm saying, is that the more we embolden, the more we empower someone like Mohammed bin Salman, the less they'll have leverage, and the more they'll lose their freedoms as well. So it will backfire. It's not only about today's repression and I don't know, women being tortured in prisons, or our relatives being on travel bans. No, it's about really the loss of freedoms in the free world, as we call it. So this is what I try to make them realize, that it's much broader than just football or Saudi Arabia as such.
Thank you so much, Lina. And it really goes back to that point. We somehow seem to not have still learned of injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? I really loved your point about financial influence, just being based in DC, where I heard Umar has come for the first time. It's really fun to look at the number of DC lobbyists, think tanks, academics, members of Congress, who 5 years ago around this time was saying, never again will we talk to Mohammed bin Salman the Saudi government, et cetera, and consider where they are today. So just an interesting exercise for folks. I do want to say we have a Q&A section, so if audience members have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. We have one right now towards Karen, asking about your book. Karen said today on Twitter, broke some news about her book about her experience with Jamal. So Karen, I'll leave the floor to you to talk about what's going on there.
Sure. I'll say what I can say. Yeah, you know, I've actually spoken with many of you for the book. Again, I think for me, back to this, and it sort of ties in general back to Jamal and back to those of us who are either from or care about marginalized voices. I knew maybe even back then that I wanted to have a space to tell, not to tell Jamal's story per se, to tell what I knew, but to tell kind of what I saw behind the scenes and what I learned about how power works behind the scenes of this story. And the time column, the piece that I wrote today, that excerpt, that scene, was a part of just what it was like to be, in some ways, a part of the story, and in some ways, a part of the institutions, these elite institutions, but in other ways to feel completely alienated from it, to not quite belong, to sort of see how the powerful can kind of keep moving and dancing while people of color are, again, being crushed, right? So that was the spirit in which I was observing everything, and the spirit in which, again, that Jamal and I sort of worked. So yeah, to that end, there is a manuscript, sadly, for reasons I still do not know. The publisher decided to not go in the same direction. So I was forced to go in a different direction again, because for me, what's most important is that the very same themes and concepts that we're talking about can be expressed in whatever work I put out. And again, to center Saudis as much as I could, to center or to decenter in many ways the prevailing sort of realpolitik and the narratives. And at the end of the day, I wanted people who watched this story and what happened to Jamal, who watched maybe from the BBC or the CNN, who don't know anything about Saudi, who don't know anything about Middle East history or politics, but were just touched by a man who was trying to marry his fiance and really liked writing and was trying to start a new life and had that stolen from him. And that's the vision that I am fighting for, still fighting for my book. So I will get this. I'm still fighting 5 years later. It's incredible in some ways that I have to still fight to get this story out there. It pains me that I have to fight, whereas the men, usually white men, who are entrusted with putting words into Saudis' mouths about how they should feel about their own country, have been able to do their projects. That's the system I'm operating and that I'm having to navigate. And I'm confident that that this book will come out when it's meant to come out, and with the right team, and that it will be an honor to Jamal's legacy. So all that said, I'm still fighting for this book to be out in the world. So I appreciate everybody's support and concern. But yeah, I'm not done yet. So.
Thanks so much. I see we have another question from Sarah, noting CPJ's numbers in 2019 and 2020, seeing a significant increase in the number of journalists detained by the Saudis. I wonder if we could use that question. She's asking, has the space for free press collapsed I'll toss it to any of you who want to take that from a Saudi perspective and also from a regional perspective, if you could talk a little bit about the Arab world more broadly.
Yeah, I can sort of quickly talk about like the space in general, the space for free press, and I guess a lot of it depends on how you define that, right? So we have seen even in terms of the Arab world, that even when Jamal was writing, part of his impetus to write so much was that space was rapidly closing, and not just even he himself, he was forced into exile. The piece that he wrote for the Washington Post in 2017 was his first piece since being banned from writing. And as Lena has said, it's a common tactic that they don't only just silence you, they silence your friends and your family. I'd say from the US side, when we talk of threats to press freedom, of course, and we've talked about, the sort of outright, the jailings, the Twitter bans, the blocking of the beatings even. I also think a threat to press freedom is this access journalism, is being afraid to not be able to get access to the rich and powerful, so you write flattering things about dictators and powerful people and MBS. To me, I'm trying to be very diplomatic here. To me, that is not freedom. You're chained by money. It's a different sort of jail to me. So I think that is also a threat, and that is something that I think in Washington, that this is something in the elite journalism circles that there are a lot of journalists who need to ask why they're in this business, right? And then look at even social media and seeing how even the way Twitter, social media platforms are being surveilled, and the threats coming not just from governments, but even the platforms themselves. I mean, now having to pay Elon Musk if you want your message to be heard, seeing the proliferations of trolls and abuse and hate speech. It is becoming increasingly harder to use those same tools that were once supposed to be for freedom and expression and connection, and now have turned much more into pay for play, much more into a complete disregard for protections, and frankly, danger spaces now. So it's worrying, even for us here in the US, for me in the US. I don't want to pretend that press freedom here is something that should be taken for granted either. There was just a few months ago, a raid on a Kansas paper we saw during Black Lives Matter. We saw journalists being tear gassed, being injured. We saw January 6th, my colleagues of mine who were traumatized, who were threatened. I mean, the threat is here. Of course, it's not to the same level and extent as a place like Saudi Arabia. But I think for me, in all of my kind of attempts at advocacy and for people to understand why maybe, I would fight so hard for Jamal, it's because I don't take freedom of the press anywhere for granted, particularly as a Black woman, because I also know the history of this country. And I think it's we're in very fraught times right now, I think.
Thank you, Karen. Lena, I'll let you take the question in the Q&A for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Akbar. I'll just add something on the freedom of the press in Saudi. Omar and Abdullah can add or correct if they don't agree, but not only freedom of the press has completely vanished in Saudi Arabia, but also media has been instrumentalized for political reasons as well. So when you see all these impulsive decisions by the government, whether it's about Qatar or whether it's about, Yemen, Iran, anything that's very impulsive, you have to have the newspaper applauding it and, having all these also poems about how brave they are for these decisions. And so I think it's important to note that. And just on a personal note, when my sister was arrested and that we found out about the torture, one of the main Saudi newspapers, Orkad, had an article titled Human Rights Organizations Lie About Saudi Arabia, saying that all the organizations that said that my sister was tortured, they were lying, basically. So yes, now it's unfortunately it's not only that there are touchy or sensitive topics, but it's used and instrumentalized by the government. Omar, you can.
Yeah, I would just add something. I wouldn't say that we used to live in a democratic country before. It wasn't democracy before, but there was a little space where we could breathe. We felt like we're joking about it. When I was hanging out with Abdullah yesterday, I was telling him during the democratic era in Saudi Arabia, we used to say 1, 2, 3, 4, but today we're not allowed to do that. By the way, they're not only forcing and scaring journalists in Saudi Arabia, but they're starting to do that. They did that with Qatar. It's a completely different story, but they just started to do that against Kuwaiti journalists in the last 3 to 4 days. They started to threaten some of them. They started to say, listen, we did 1, 2, 3, 4 to so many people, and you're not that far. Because in Kuwait, they have their own democratic system. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but at least they can go and they vote and they choose their representatives, while we don't have this luxury in Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a last question. For Lina, do you have hope? But I think Abdullah and Omar can answer as well. Do you have hope that things will get better, that there will be human rights in Saudi Arabia? How do you keep going? Well, my answer is always the same. We are Saudi Arabia first. As long as we believe we will change things, things will change. We can't, I don't think Mohammed bin Salman is Saudi Arabia. I don't think the Saudi government is Saudi Arabia. For me, Saudi Arabia is myself. And as long as I believe it, things will change. I mean, just like when you're fighting for a job, you also fight for your country. And there's no reason why it won't change. I think that more and more people feel this repression. I mean, I always say Abdullah and I have absolutely different profiles. I wouldn't have talked to him in my life before MBS, but we have the same repressor. He united us. The more there is repression, the closer we are to freedom also. So this is how I see things. And unfortunately, I mean, we will all stay alive and see it, and no one will. That there won't be another Khashoggi, hopefully.
Thank you. Omar or Abdullah, did either of you want to hop in on that question as well? Okay. Well, thank you all to our audience. I'm going to give one last question to our panel in hopes of really honoring what Jamal was doing in that final chapter of his life that was unfairly cut short, publicly and privately, through setting up organizations, talking to other activists, and publicly through his writing. Jamal was really trying to spark, in a way, a movement, right, to uphold a certain set of values, not just in the Arab world, but worldwide. And I'd love to hear from each of you if there's any particular organization, individual, policymaker, even, who's doing that kind of work to uphold Jamal's values today, who you're really hopeful for. Maybe someone who's been overlooked and isn't getting the attention they deserve.
Go ahead, Lina.
No, it was the question for all of us. Go ahead, Karen. I'll have to think of it.
Honestly, and I'm not just saying this because I'm sharing space with you guys. Honestly, I would say the people here on this call, on this panel right now, and Dawn, the organization that Jamal has founded, Lena, your sister, Walid, your brother, Abdullah, like, I honestly, Khadija, I mean, just for me, I mean, there's so many, but for me, like, I think what you guys have continued to do despite such incredible threats to yourselves and to your family, Abdullah, you know, still monitoring the case of your father, because I think Jamal would have kept writing about your father until everybody knew his name. Salman al-Uda, who was imprisoned in I believe 2017, right before, not too long before Jamal actually came to the post. So I understand that there are a lot of voices that have been very important, but now they have chosen to gone silent because, and you cannot blame them because the risks are so great. Honestly, I still follow all of you guys, and especially being Saudi, also, you know, would love to shout out the Freedom Initiative as well. You guys have just been doing such incredible work in what I know is such a difficult space to be heard, given it's very convenient for the geopolitics of US sort of, not just Saudi, but US sort of Middle East policy to pretend like Arab people don't exist, because it makes it more convenient for them to enact the policies that they want. Oh, I'd like to shout out Safa Ahmed, another Saudi documentary filmmaker who has amazing work. She's done amazing work on Yemen. I hope she sees this one day, and she has also been great. Yeah, and for me, it's as much as I can, you know, to be an ally to you guys, because at the end of the day, this is your country, and it's been inspiring to see what you just mentioned, like that. MBS brought y'all together, but Jamal brought us together. The fact that even I feel sometimes like an honorary Saudi. It was Jamal who told me what my name even meant in Arabic. So Jamal had a really amazing way of bringing people together. So I think the most, even if just us coming together in and of itself is justice and an act of resistance. People who were different and were told to stay away from one another, now coming together and not just finding trauma, but finding connection. That's incredibly powerful and incredibly dangerous to the autocrats. So even if it's just meeting for rice and lamb, it's important for us to keep writing, but for us to keep talking and meeting and finding our common threads. So I hope we can all continue to do that.
Thank you, Karen. It's really an honor, and you're really an honorary citizen of Saudi. We can give you that.
Is that my area?
Have one. I would say for me, I think, given my background, I think credit has been given where due when it comes to the feminist movement, including to my sister and the other activists. But I think that many names have been forgotten in this fight, including still feminists who are in prison and men who have been fighting with Saudi women. I think that's important to note also. So I would say it's everyone who's in prison but forgotten a bit. So I'll just maybe give a name. For example, Mohammed al-Rabi'a. He's one of the bravest feminists I know, and he's a man. He's still in prison. He was arrested with my sister. He had the same fight. He was really supporting women rights activists. You have Osama Khalid, who was also supporting women rights activists by translating their Wikipedia page. And, no one really hears about him, but he's in prison. You have all the ones who have been arrested based on anonymous accounts that we managed finally to get names out there. So Lina Al-Sharif, Asma Sbai'i, Rina Abdelaziz, and all the ones that, unfortunately, we tend to forget because of this, the circumstances surrounding their arrest, because either families are scared, they can't relay the information. So I just always have them in my mind, and I'm just so grateful for their fight as well.
Thank you so much, Lina.
I would say to the ones that I don't know their names, and especially after the death of Khashoggi, so many people decided to talk, to tweet back there in Saudi, and so many of them disappeared. Hundreds of people. We don't know most of their names. And so many activists, so many even regular people decided to flee the country, to keep doing what we're doing, to keep delivering these messages. They were affected by the story touched by the story of Jamal Khashoggi, about what happened to him and to the other activists, including your sister, Lina, including your father, Abdullah, and my brothers and friends too. So we have to pay attention to all of them, or to most of them, especially the ones who flee, the ones who left the country, because we were a bit busy in the last 5 years. I think today we should change some of our plans to pay more attention to the new activists, because I do believe that they can deliver more.
Thank you so much. Abdullah, I know you know the networks as well. I won't let you off the hook. Whose work do you think is amazing that we need to be paying more attention to?
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna echo all of my colleagues here said. Really, I mean, a lot of times I remember like a few friends back home and around the world who actually made a lot of things happen and published. They made a lot of noise that I think it led to many of the great things to shed light on the, Khashoggi events, the murder, around the violations, around the reforms, those who actually work. I know, for example, I'm not going to name names because all of these people are anonymous, but these people I really, really want to honor because they still work on a daily basis. They volunteer, they actually take from their time, from their jobs, from their family, in order to defend the rights of our people. And they actually still do that. And they are, I would say they are, let's say, the hidden soldiers for many, many products that we have seen around the world, including and particularly on Twitter, like videos, pieces, reports, many, many things that they made the things happen. We, and I would say, speak for myself, depend on them a lot of times to get the right information, to get to the right people, to get to, to the data that we otherwise cannot get. So thank you to all of them and to all of you guys.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. And I'll say, yeah, please, Lina.
I think it's important. It's actually the book fair at the moment in Saudi. And when there was the wave of arrests of my sister and the other activists, a man named Anas al-Mazrou said during the book fair, "Where is Lujain? Where is Aziza?" He named them all during that book fair. And he has unfortunately been missing since. So also naming him.
Thank you. And I've written down some of these names. I'm grateful to all of you for highlighting them to me, to people in media, to people in positions to try to make change. As we kind of close this commemoration, I want to thank everyone who joined us for this conversation. I want to thank our great panel. This is a difficult subject to talk about, but if anything, 5 years on, it seems the energy is strong, the stubbornness is there. And, you know, as the title for this event said, Justice for Jamal is very much a live movement and question 5 years on and probably for years and years to come. Thank you all for joining us. Please stay connected to the Freedom Initiative, Dawn, Mohammed, the other great groups involved in this. They're working on this every day. And, you know, Karen and I will be writing on it too. So keep an eye out for our work. Thank you, everyone. Take care.